World Championship challenger Javokhir Sindarov takes on Andy Woodward in a very interesting clash at the Blitz finals of the Naroditsky Memorial 2026. Andy was the only player who beat Javokhir in the rapid section. Javokhir scored 6 out of 7 and then went on to win the playoffs against Arvind. So he's kind of the only player to have beaten Javokhir here, and now they play once again in the Blitz tournament. Let's see how this game pans out. It's 3 minutes plus 2 seconds increment. I really enjoy watching Andy Woodward play. He's one of the biggest talents of US chess. Off we go. Pawn to e4, we have the Sicilian, and Javokhir goes for the close Sicilian with d6. Oh, he plays the Grand Prix attack. Wow, this is going to be fun. Bishop comes back to c4, knight to c6, and the point of Grand Prix is that you put a very aggressive system here. Pawn to f5, opening up the bishop. The knight could jump to g5, rook comes to f1, and so Andy Woodward is now thinking, okay, first questions first. If you take ef5, I can go castles and then knight g5 is coming up. So maybe the best way to play is to play gf, ef and push the pawn to d5. That could be the way, but you can see Andy Woodward is a bit out of his preparation here, and so he's thinking about what to do, and he decides to ignore it by playing knight to f6. Interesting decision. Javokhir now would also be out of his preparation. He goes f takes e6, bishop takes e6. By the way, the better move here was bishop f4 perhaps, but fe, bishop takes. And now black already has a nice position out of the opening. All pieces are developed nicely. You go to castle, and if white doesn't do anything, then you can even push the pawn to d5. This is the reason why Javokhir Sindarov is now thinking the opening hasn't really gone as per plan for him. But Javokhir is a big fighter, he's going to fight this through and see what are his best opportunities. Castles is definitely an option. Another idea is to take, but that kind of improves black's pawn structure. Long thing here. Javokhir goes castles, and now Andy also castles it out. Bishop goes back to b3. Okay, one point is the knight always jumps to g5, also the bishop, so h6 is a very useful move. Another plan is to push the pawn to d5. I really like this idea because that kind of gets rid of the d6 backward pawn. But Andy Woodward here, he's the one who's now thinking, and he is down to 1 minute 50 seconds. There's also another plan in such positions to go rook to b8 and b5 b4 to try and attack here. Ooh, that's unusually long things in the opening for a blitz game by both Javokhir and Andy. He goes knight to d7, not the best move, but one can understand. He wants to go maybe knight e5 and then use the dark squares for his other pieces. Interesting. Okay, for Sindarov now, he goes bishop g5, very nice move. f6 cannot be played, bishop e6 hangs with a check. Queen b6, the king tucks itself into the corner, no longer on this diagonal, and Andy jumps in with his knight to e5. The position already looks very pleasant for white. Knight takes knight. Now if you take with the pawn, there's knight to d5 jumping into the center, so he takes with the knight, and Javokhir takes knight d5, takes on d5, bishop d5, putting pressure on the f7 point. Also c3, d4 is in the air, king h8, and now can Sindarov played bishop e7, rook to e8, and then come back so that f7 pawn becomes a bit soft. That's one plan. He goes queen d2. Of course, taking on b2 is not without dangers because the rook can enter in. So rook a e8, controlling the e7 square. And now c3 with the idea of d4. The f7 point is weak. You can already see white has the bishop pair, the open f file, but queen a6, such a nice move, attacking the pawn on d3. If you play d4, then maybe after takes, the knight could jump in, but I guess the knight would get trapped. So maybe d4 is not a bad idea. Yes, d4 played. Pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. If knight d3, you have maybe just rook to f3. There's also rook a d1. That doesn't work. So the knight must go back. Andy Woodward also down under a minute on the clock now. Javokhir has 1 minute 23 seconds. He's thinking here. He goes knight to c6 back. And now can we snatch the pawn on f7? The problem is e4 is hanging. So he plays bishop f6, controlling the d4 square and also keeping the e4 pawn protected. Good move. Queen b6, rook a d1 played. And now for Andy Woodward, knight e7 to get rid of this bishop. Makes sense. He goes knight b4 the other direction, bishop b3. But now is the e4 pawn hanging? If rook takes e4, there is queen h6. What a move. And it's winning. So you can't really take this pawn on e4. But you can first take on f6 and then take on e4. So he takes, rook takes and now takes on e4. But Sindarov now has a weakened king here. Knight. He goes queen h6, queen to d8, but rook f1. This is already clearly winning. What an attack this is on the f7 point. Just going back with the knight to c6 was a big mistake. And now bishop takes f7, knight takes pawn, but there is bishop takes g6 happening. And Javokhir goes for it. He takes the pawn. Now the f8 rook is hanging. And Sindarov is playing so well. Rook takes, and now rook f8 is a threat. He goes rook g7, but bishop takes h7. If you take rook h7, rook f8 is game over. So d5 played. And look at Javokhir calculating here. Bishop g6, king g8, bishop f7. If king f8, check here. And he resigns. Javokhir Sindarov beats Andy Woodward. What an amazing game this was. Just fantastic play. And I think there were some key moments where Andy could have improved. But overall, playing the Grand Prix attack and beating Andy is a great task.